Penguin Random House Audio presents The House on Buzzards Bay, a novel by Dwyer Murphy. Read for you by Greg Tremblay. For Carolina and Eloisa. 1. I've been friendly with the same group of people for roughly 20 years. It began during college and continued in New York, and together we survived the usual city plights of unemployment, railroad apartments, income disparities, bad relationships, and good marriages. My wife was the last to join us. I was nearly 30 when we met. By that time, the friendships had long since calcified, and it was fortunate she got along with the others so well as she did. We were married in City Hall on a damp October morning, and afterward held a reception at Callan's Tavern on East 6th Street, in a back room built around a wood stove and what appeared to be a disused pulpit. Valentina's family was in Venezuela, and except for her sister, they were unable to attend. One by one, my college friends, who were also my New York friends, the closest people in my life at that time and for some years after, climbed the wooden stairs very solemnly, like a clan of Bay Colony ministers, and gave their respective toasts, each finding something genuine and personal to say about my new wife. In the years that followed, Valentina forged her own bonds and shared memories and secrets with the others. When the twins were born, she was the one who suggested we make Rami the godfather. It seemed to me such an old-fashioned and touching gesture, and I worked hard to find a priest who would take us, 2 lapsed Catholics and their Muslim friend. I don't mention any of this because I think it a great distinction to remain acquainted with the people assigned to your freshman year housing. I only mean to impress that we were a unit, and thought of ourselves that way, and relied on one another to perform certain rituals and courtesies normally reserved for blood. When I was 25, and still in the throes of New York, I inherited a large house on the southeastern coast of Massachusetts, on Buzzards Bay. It had been built several generations prior by an ancestor, with a penchant for gables, and would have passed to my mother and father had they been alive. The town where it was built, Patuxet, was a small place. I knew it well, having spent summers there, looked after by aunts while my parents were abroad. It seemed to me an eccentric and slightly disreputable thing, owning a beach house at such a young age. But it cost relatively little to maintain, and I couldn't imagine selling. After 6 months of ownership and 3 blustery spring visits, when the bay was engorged and the locals all seemed to hurry about in sealskin, I came up with the plan that would later coalesce under the fairly ridiculous name of the Nanamet Sand and Swim Club, or the NSSC. I was just out of law school then, and intoxicated with the idea of property and contractual obligations. I drew up the paperwork myself. The NSSC was a New York-style co-op, except that the property held in common was a long stretch of Nanamet Beach, carved out from the plot I inherited, 137 Hazel Drive. I distributed 4 shares, 1 each to my friends, for a grand total of $80, and kept the 5th for myself. With the unanimous consent of all stakeholders, a 6th share was issued to Valentina after we were married. Annual fees were $75, the collection of which was habitually waived, with proceeds strictly limited to beach upkeep and the purchase of towels and communal sundries. I suppose you could call it a ploy. At an age when it seemed less far-fetched to travel somewhere interesting in the summers, I wanted to improve my odds of having company on vacations and long weekends away. As our 20s turned over and the demands of work and family drew us in new directions and away from New York, those beach summits kept us bound. It seemed a mercy, having people around who remembered how you'd been before the edges were smoothed. The house was large enough to fit the 6 of us and many more, but soon our schedules began to intersect less frequently. Rami went off to work for a series of trade commissions and moved for a time to Europe. His vacations were irregular. He would breeze in one evening unannounced and stay for an indeterminate number of days. Shannon and Maya tended to visit in August, but more and more we were a stopover on the way to Martha's Vineyard, where Maya's family rented a house. Bruce was the first to abandon the effort altogether. He had never been very fond of the beach, though he accepted his share in the NSSC graciously and had the certificate framed in oak. Even on those evenings when the sun seemed to melt into the trees and our neighbors lingered on porches and brought chairs and drinks to the high ground over the beach to enjoy those obscure, evanescent moments, we would have to drag him out from whatever task he'd set upon in the house, usually a repair of some kind, though he wasn't especially handy, and the constant disassembly and reconstruction of piping, garbage disposals, and light sockets never brought him anything but despair. He had been raised in Pennsylvania, in the hill country west of Gettysburg. The coast meant nothing to him. When he was young, he had gone to the Chesapeake for a week with his family, and he seemed to glean everything he needed to know of the eastern seaboard from those nights in his grandparents' bungalow eating boiled crab and stews. As for Valentina and me, we took our summers seriously. More so after the twins were old enough to share the sentiment. The rest of the year we were a foursome of disparate tastes and inclinations, but in summer we all knelt before the same icons and said the old prayers to barefoot days and cool nights that sent you looking for a sweatshirt. Valentina was on the law school faculty and tended to have July and August free. Occasionally her research assistants would come to stay, and we would do our best to show them a good and only slightly corrupting time. Rami might call ahead from Geneva or Istanbul, wherever he was stationed, and ask which students she had hired, and what they looked like, and whether they were interested in prematurely graying Arab men. Nothing much ever came of it. If it had, he would have told Valentina, and weeks or months down the line she would have mentioned it to me in passing as though surely I knew. They had an air of worldly conspiracy between them, always, and it gave the parochial New Englander in me no end in quiet, contrary satisfaction. We tended to plan our first weekends in the house carefully and to dedicate the opening days to logistics, all the little chores required by life on the coast. There were errands to run, towels and sheets to inspect for moth damage, poison ivy to pull from between patches of grass, and then the house itself to look after, shingles to be nailed down, gutters that were inevitably clogged with leaves, and the water tanks, which were connected to a spring, fed well but managed to stink of eggs for 2 days after our arrival. I hadn't expected to relish those chores, but over the years had come to. It wasn't the pride of ownership. I had no illusions there. The house was mine by chance. That year, we headed up the last weekend in June. The drive from New Haven kept to the coast. Once we passed New Bedford, the land began to slope downward toward the lower sea basin. It felt as if the car could be shifted into neutral, and we would reach our destination by fate. Normally, Valentina would have dozed beside me, as the twins did in the back. Instead, we were discussing plans for the holiday and proposing little touches that ought to be added to the house to make things comfortable. It was going to be the first time in several years that our friends, all the members of the NSSC, would come together under one roof. It was an unexpected moment. Until 2 nights before, we'd had no inkling that Rami would be back in the States so soon, or that the house Maya's family normally rented on the vineyard had been swiped out from under them. The chance that they would all three be coming for the same weeks in July was almost too abstract to consider. Though not so long before, when we were all still living in the city, it would have been nearly unthinkable for an entire summer to pass without somebody getting hold of a car and hauling the others north for at least a week. Bruce was going to join us too. He had called just that morning, surprising me. He hadn't been to the house in years. I waited until we were exiting the highway to mention it to Valentina. We talked it over and decided he would sleep in what we called the garden room. There was no garden, but there were doors that opened to a yard, and he wouldn't have to look at the beach through his windows. There was an air conditioner, too, a window unit. It would cost me at least a morning to get it installed. "How did he sound?" Valentina asked. Like himself.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?